Chapter 4. Into the Night. Oh, my God! Ari's mother fell to her knees in front of her husband, weeping uncontrollably now, clutching his legs. "Blessed Virgin, help me!" He shook her off and sank back into his chair at the table, staring at Ari with eyes that blazed hatred. In stunned horror, Ari recoiled at the scene before him. The stinging words had resurrected memories of childhood fears and uncertainties that now paraded before him in haunting progression. Even his name had made him wonder. Ari wasn't German, it was Jewish. Surely his father, who hated all things Jewish with a passion, would never have named him that. His mother had insisted that it had been her choice, but there were no relatives with that name. Helping his mother to her feet, Ari held her hands and made her face him. "Look at me," he pleaded. "He's lying, isn't he? You told me I wasn't adopted. You swore that I wasn't." She turned away and pulled one hand loose to wipe at her eyes. "It's true," she mumbled, almost inaudibly. "You're a Jew, Ari." "Look at us, then look at you," continued his father's taunting voice. "Did you never wonder? We're both tall and blonde. You're much shorter, with dark skin. You look like a Jew." He spat out the last sentence contemptuously. Ari was reeling like a boxer about to go down for the count. Yes, he had wondered. Often. He clutched at his mother's arm and looked agonizingly into her face. "I've seen my birth certificate. It gives date and place and says you're my mother." She turned away again, unable to look at him. "I lied. It was easy. All the records of that hospital were burned in the war. They made new birth certificates. I only had to sign a paper." A low chuckle sounded from the now triumphant figure at the table. Slow of speech when sober, he became increasingly eloquent when drunk. "Everything you hate is what you are. I always said it was a pity that Hitler didn't kill them all, and you agreed. You wanted them all dead. Well, you're one of them." An ugly laugh wobbled out of control. Shattered and dazed, Ari took his mother by the arm and led her into the small alcove that had served as his bedroom. It had been thoroughly ransacked. Drawers were pulled out and emptied, the bed torn apart, mattress ripped open, but the hiding place was still intact. That piece of good fortune seemed meaningless now. A Jew! It can't be. Hopelessly confused, Ari turned to the woman beside him again. She was weeping. "Tell me the truth," he demanded quietly. "We had neighbors where we used to live, far from here," she answered between sobs. "They were Jews, good people, school teachers, intelligent, very kind. I liked them. We were friends. It was 1944. France was on the Russian front. Jews were being relocated, but we suspected the worst. They left their little Ariel, I shortened your name to Ari, with me, just before the Gestapo came for them. You were 3 months old. I promised to keep you until they came back. After the war. They never did. I couldn't have a baby, and now you are mine. It was 2 years before Franz came home. He didn't want to keep you, but I insisted. I'd made a promise. And I loved you, Ari. I always will." In silent pain, they clung to each other. So she had lied all those years to protect him. He had been adopted. But he wasn't a Jew. He couldn't admit that. His real parents couldn't have been Jews. It had been a mistake. Hitler hadn't only killed Jews. He had killed lots of Germans, too. That's who his parents had been, German intellectuals who opposed Hitler, just as he, their son, now sought to overthrow the present evil regime. Glancing into the kitchen, Ari was alarmed to see that the pitiful drunk he was glad to know was not his real father had staggered to the phone and was now talking to someone. Ari started toward him, but it was too late. The conversation was just ending with the ominous words, "He's here right now." Cursing himself for not paying closer attention, Ari went swiftly to work. While his mother watched in bewilderment, he pulled out a pocket knife and made 4 quick slits in the cheap wallpaper he had put up 2 summers ago and had repaired several times since. Prying a short length of board from the wall, Ari pulled out the papers hidden behind it, threw them onto the coals in the kitchen stove, and crouched in front of it, fanning the flame and watching until every incriminating fragment was consumed. I've got to leave, Mama. He straightened up wearily and took both of her hands again. Please don't worry. I'm going to be okay. If you're innocent, Ari, why not give yourself up? He looked at her lovingly. That would only make it worse for both of us. Once they accuse you... Why you, Ari? He ignored her question. Listen, don't defend me. Tell the truth, that you know nothing. Just stick to that. He was terrified for her, for what might happen when the police came back. How could he leave her? But he must. You'll always be my mother, he said tenderly. She nodded, beginning to weep softly again. Ari put an arm around her frail shoulders, ignoring the man he'd called his father, pretending not to know about the phone call. They'll expect me to head for the railway station in Berlin, he told her confidently, but just loud enough to reach other ears. I'm going to fool them. I have a car, and I'm heading in the opposite direction, toward the Czech border. You can't get away, Ari, she pleaded. Wouldn't it be better? Don't worry. I know a place to hide for a few days. I'll slip into Czechoslovakia, then Yugoslavia, then into Austria. I've got a Western passport. All right. The wretched figure slouched at the table had straightened up ever so slightly. The alcohol-dulled eyes had come to life and taken on a veiled cunning. He would tell the police everything. They would reward him for it, certainly a promotion, maybe even a medal. With a hurried kiss, he bade her goodbye, then strode quickly toward the door, where he hesitated. My parents, do you remember their names? She had followed and now caught up to him, clutching at an arm. She shook her head sadly. When they didn't come back, I blanked it all out. You were mine, and I didn't want to remember anything else. Don't leave me, Ari. Were there other children? He asked, stroking her hand gently and ignoring her plea. She shook her head again. They were young. You were their first. I remember that. They were dirty, stinking Jews, just like you. The pitiful creature at the table had lurched to his feet and was laughing at Ari now. You won't get far, you Jew. Franz didn't know them, she said defiantly. They were good people, just like you, Ari. The children loved them. Everyone had flowers in those days, but no one could grow them like your mother. She had a special touch in everything she did. Ari pulled away from her, shoved the door open, and ran into the night. They were good people. The children loved them. As Ari reached the barn, he heard that gloating voice yelling after him through the open door. I called the police! He was so eager to inflict pain that he couldn't keep the secret any longer. I called the police, he yelled again. You won't get far. They'll get you, you Jew. The words trailed off in a strangled spasm of coughing and laughter. The moon was out now, for which Ari was thankful. He hoped that everyone in the commune was watching so they could all tell the Stasi. Running through the fringe of woods, he quickly found the hidden police car. Thankfully, there were no markings on it, and the keys were inside. It started immediately. He backed it out onto the country road and, with a roar of the engine and high-pitched squeal of tires spinning in the gravel, accelerated past the cluster of houses. He wanted everyone to see that he was heading in the direction away from the village and toward the south, just as he had pretended to confide to his mother. That monster back there would tell the police and throw them off his trail, momentarily gaining him precious time. At the first crossroads, Ari turned left, then left again at the next one, reversing his original direction. After winding through farmland and villages for several miles, he came at last to a major northbound highway that would take him to Berlin. He knew, however, that he dare not follow it for long. The radio! Why hadn't he thought of it sooner? Turning the instrument on, he found it alive with frantic activity. The police had arrived at the farm shortly after his departure, had discovered the two bodies, knew the vehicle was missing, and were now putting out roadblocks to the south as fast as they could. They were searching for him with a vengeance and would be especially vigilant at the Czech border. A general alarm had also been sounded to be on the lookout for him everywhere. He had to leave the car. Leaving the main highway at a familiar junction, Ari angled west. With luck, he'd reach the station at Jüterbog, where all trains to Berlin stopped. It was now after 2 o'clock in the morning. There was a mail train he had sometimes taken that left his village at 1:54 a.m., which would put it at this isolated station around 2:40 a.m. It would be tight, but maybe he could make it. He had to. The problem would be finding a place to leave the car where it wouldn't be found for a long time. In his search for a good hiding place, Ari turned off onto a smaller road that meandered through several tiny villages and would eventually lead directly to the station. About 5 miles from his destination, the terrain became rolling farmland interspersed with patches of woods. 2 miles from the station, the road began winding along a river. He thought of running the car into it, but the water wasn't deep enough to cover the vehicle. Valuable time was lost investigating dirt side roads that were little more than tire tracks leading into the woods. Unfortunately, in each case the tracks ended very quickly in fields. The car might remain hidden for days, or at dawn that very morning a farm worker driving a tractor through the woods to a field might discover it. He couldn't take the chance, but he was running out of time and had to catch this train. The next one wouldn't come for several hours. Ari came to an abandoned farmhouse and was tempted to leave the car out of sight behind the barn. But as soon as he drove onto the property, it was obvious that tire tracks across mud and weeds would be a dead giveaway. Backing out hurriedly, he continued his desperate search. Just before the road left the woods, he followed one last set of tire tracks back through the trees. It, too, led to a large field that was under cultivation. This one, however, unlike most of the others he'd passed, had not yet been plowed, increasing the chance of early discovery. He'd have to go back to a field he'd seen earlier that had just been planted and probably wouldn't be visited for some time. He should have left the car there instead of hoping for something better. A look at his watch told Ari that he'd never make it. Cursing his luck, he grabbed his briefcase and, abandoning the car, ran back through the woods to the paved road and along it as fast as he could toward the town about a mile away. It seemed a fairly safe assumption that the police would not be watching this or any other train station as long as they thought he was in a car. At least the main pursuit was concentrated in the wrong direction in reliance upon information dutifully supplied. A father's betrayal of his only son would surely earn the goodwill of the party. That piece of treachery must have brought great satisfaction and would have called for a few more beers, which he'd be sleeping off by now. The painful thought reminded Ari of his real parents, martyrs of Hitler's cruelty. Their ashes or bones lay in some unmarked grave, unknown to the world and, more tragically, to him, their only son. "But I'm not a Jew. It isn't true, it isn't true." The refrain of denial kept cadence with Ari's flying feet as he pressed himself to the limit.